오늘 발표는 EU의 지식재산 혁신과 스타트업이라는 주제로 발표해 주시겠습니다. 다시 한번 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
Thank you very much, dear moderator, dear audience. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. It's a long time ago that I was here in Seoul. Let's say it's almost like 10 years ago. And I'm happy to be here again. So I had to talk about open innovation and startups, about the IP in startups, the role of IP in startups when they engage in open innovation. By the way, Neoma is no longer my business school. I moved to the United Kingdom, and so life goes fast. I go to Surrey, right? And see in a few weeks' time it changes. Let me start with one single comment, one single statement. In the world nowadays, IP is highly distributed. It's no longer hoarded by big companies only. More and more universities have a lot of IP. More and more startups, like we have heard, have a lot of IP. So if IP is distributed, and the knowledge is going very fast, is moving very fast forward, you will see it's not only important to have technology, to own technology, but to create contracts, to make contracts, smart contracts, to use technologies from other partners, from other organizations, or make sure that you have contracts where other companies, where other startups can use your technology that you are not using. So it's not ownership which is only important, it's also the use of technologies of other organizations. And that's basically on open innovations. So, what is open innovation? Let's come back to the definition that we used in 2006. Well, it's all about knowledge use, so it's about the inflows of knowledge towards a company. Here, that's for a big company. Assume you're Samsung, you're a big company. So you use technology, you use knowledge from another company, from other companies, from startups, from universities, and you bring that into Samsung to use it to make your own products. But it's also about outflows of knowledge, because Samsung and other companies have a lot of technology they never ever use. And that's not bad management, that's just part of the process. So why not licensing this technology? Why not making sure that other organizations can use this technology and you monetize on it? So that's basically open innovation, that's what we do. So you can put it into a funnel like this. You start with a lot of internal technology, you start with external technology, you have the development process, and finally, some very few of these projects will end up as a product in your own company. You have to source technology from other companies to strengthen, let us say, your own innovation engine in your company. But a lot of technology is not used in the company itself, and so you can license it out, you can divest it, or you can generate, or let's say startup, make a startup, right? And spin-off, you can create a spin-off and make sure that this technology can live its own life. So what has this now to do with IP management? Well, it's not new, because Henry Chesbrough already in 2006, when he was talking about open business model, he was basically focusing on IP already. And what is now an open business model? Well, an open business model is, you have two sides. You have the outside in, so where useful technologies are sourced from internal and external sources, and the inside out, where you monetize on unused technologies through external parts of the market. So open business models require a different view on IP. It's a strategic view on IP. What does this mean? It means that the IP is seen in an overall portfolio that supports the business model. Because a company has a particular business model, it won't produce particular products or services, and so then it needs a portfolio of IP. So you look for synergies between the individual elements of the IP that are consciously identified. What does that mean for exchanging IP? Well, internal IP, so your own IP, which is not supporting the business model, will become a candidate for licensing or outright sales. On the other hand, external IP, which is interesting to strengthen your own business model, that will be an attractive candidate to acquire from the outside. So you're going to trade IP, you're going to trade knowledge between companies to strengthen your own business model, or in case that it cannot strengthen your business model, you're going to try to license it out, or you're going to try to set up a spin-off. So that was Henry Chesbrough in 2006, so that's already like 13 years ago. What I want to do is very simple, through a number of cases, showing you what small companies, because I was asked to focus on startups, and by the way, I'm not the only one working on this. There is here in the room Sunju Lee, so one of the Koreans that have already a long-standing career on research on similar topics. Where is Sunju Lee? Sunju Lee? She is here somewhere, but anyway, there she is. Okay, in the end. So I'm happy that I have Korean colleagues here. So, but I'm going to try to take 3 examples and show in detail how small firms, startups, have to try to connect to larger companies or to other companies to generate IP or to use IP of others. Let's start with a case, I call it Sanus. Sanus is a small company, ACE is the big company. Here it's all about how do we negotiate between small companies and large companies. How do we make sure a small company has a new technology? Yeah? It's a high-tech company, that's Sanus, and it wants to collaborate with the big company, here in this case ACE. It wants to collaborate because the big company has complementary assets. It has a road to market, it has manufacturing skills, it has everything that a small company does not have. The small company only has its patents, its IP. That's the only property it has, it's only its asset it has. So how do you make this kind of arrangements, right? How do you negotiate? And by the way, this is a case that I'm using already 10 years with MBAs and executive MBAs. You can find, it's also in Chinese, but not in Korean, I think. You can find it online, the case Sanus ACE. You can buy it, and I use it a lot with MBAs. It's a kind of negotiation game. So how does it work? What is the basic premise? You have a startup company, here Sanus. It's a very small company. And then it wants to negotiate with a big company. What you find in a big company usually is a venturing arm. A venturing arm who is specifically designed, specifically set up to work together with these small companies. And usually they take a minority equity into these small firms. They take like 10%, 15% of the equity. The other equity is owned already by venture capitalists or other companies. So what the big company is doing is it an interesting investment? So it's checking, is this technology good or not, right? Can we use it or not? But then you will see that, on the other hand, you have a business unit within that big company that will exploit the technology, that will commercialize the technology. So the venturing arm is just checking and making the relationship and buying in via a minority equity. But here, the business unit will try to make it a business. What a big company wants to do, a big manufacturing company wants to do, is to generate a new business out of the technology of the small firm, right? So what you usually see is that in bad cases is that they make an agreement, so the first arrow there, between the big company and the small company. They don't negotiate with the business unit, and then you see that the business unit has different motives, different objectives, and you get into a kind of fight. So in this case here, it's different. In this case here, where Sanus and ACE work together, you're going to have the venturing arm, the business unit, and the startup together negotiating about this exchange, let's say, of IP. How does it work? How do you have to look at it? Well, the first thing you have to realize is that, at least in case of innovations, small and large companies complement each other. A large company has a lot of assets that a small company does not have. It can do a lot of things that a small company never ever can do. But the small company has this technology which the big company needs. So it's like a marriage. A good marriage, you can do a lot of things together. So if you go for a standalone technology, you see that the startup can do only a little bit and the multinational can do a little bit. But if you combine things, if you combine forces, you have a big pie, you have a big market share you can take. If you negotiate it well. So what is the first lesson? And I do this kind of exercise with my MBAs, is to look for win-win situations. If you negotiate well in this kind of cases, you're going to look first how big the cake is that you can bake together. Right? You don't look yet for the sharp edges. You don't look for the problems. You first going to look how interesting the partnership can be. And here it's huge if you do it optimally. Of course, you have to share the pie, right? That's the big issue. You have to capture value. That's how you create value. But now you have to capture value. Well, assume, right, that in a good case, you would have 20% for the small firm and 80% for the big company. Then you see that the value capturing, if this radius is 4, then I just calculated it for you. The surface here is 10, a little bit more than 10 for the small company. Now assume that the two companies would be fighting. They are not looking for the win-win, but they are fighting about the share. And the small company wants per se 25% instead of 20%. Then what you will get is the following. So it wants to get more. It's fighting about the 25%. But what happens is that the value added, the pie is shrinking because of the infighting. Well, I make it a black and white picture here. You understand that this is a little bit simplified. But it is really what it is. And so you see if the radius is only 3 and not 4, and you fight for 25%, in this case you only have a value capturing a profit of 7 instead of 10. So it's a simplified representation of what's going on, but what you have to do in this kind of games is work on the win-win, look how far you can go together, and then look for, once you agree on that, what is the strategically what you can do together, then look for the problems and the sharp edges. And you have a lot of sharp edges. I give you a few examples in this case. A big company, usually the big company is left, the right company is the small one. Big companies don't want upfront investments. Small companies always want to invest more in research and development. You want exclusivity. Well, the small company wants to work with other partners too. And that's a very tricky one. How much exclusivity should you give to the big company? Of course, you cannot give all the exclusivity all the time for all the applications. So it's going to be about smart contracting. You're going to give exclusivity in a specific, very specific application area for a limited time, for a limited geographical area, and so on and so on. And that leaves you room to license again this technology to another company in another industry, right? And so on. The big company always wants quick results. Here you want time to develop further, right? No risk, no risk. Nobody wants to take risk. So how are we going to take risk together? So that's something you have to balance. Technology is used in strategic areas of that company. You only want research in your strategic area. But VCs and the small company, the owners, the VCs want to make sure that you're also going to have some research in other areas, because in other areas, other application areas, the value for the company, the value of the technology may even be bigger. Right? If you work, for instance, here in this case in food specialties may be a small market, but pharmaceuticals may be much bigger. So you don't want to focus only on food specialties. You want to have full access to the IP. Here you want to access to the resources of the big company, and so on. So these are, let's say, the sharp edges between the two companies. And you have to typically to negotiate in between. That's to balance here. But balancing is much easier when before you know how important you are as partners and how big the cake can be that you can bake together, right? Good. So I give you 5 reasons why big companies should be nice to small companies. Because previously, we saw too much of these big companies stealing technology from smaller companies. This time, of course you have to be careful as a small company, but you see more and more big companies behaving in a different way. Why is this? Well, first, if you cheat on a small company as a big company, you get a bad reputation. And bad reputation can be very bad because VCs talk to each other. And they will tell you that you're a bad investor. And it goes to the other VCs. They inform each other. So what is very important is that for a big company, the very best startups are knocking at their doors. If they are cheating on a small company, the very best technologies will never come, the startups will never come back to their door. They go to the competitors. So it's in the interest of a big company to behave nicely so that the very best technologies are referred to, the very best startups are referred to by the VCs. And they will knock first at your door rather than on the competitor's door. Second thing is, as a big company, you should be careful not to push too hard for a specific application. Big companies have their business. Here, in this case, it's about food specialties. So you want to push all the R&D into all the technology development into that one area. Don't do that, because this is early stage technology, and the best applications may be in other application areas. So you have to be careful, because you also limit in this way the exit possibilities for the VCs, and then you get into troubles with the majority owner. You may kill, or you probably will kill, the good spirit of cooperation, of course, if you cheat on the small company, and it will kill also the entrepreneurial spirit in the small company, because you treat it as a puppet on the strings. And finally, you see that sometimes in the US, not in Europe yet, maybe not in Korea, you see that this results in a litigation of perceived, this results in litigation, if it is perceived as abuse of economic power by the big company. Okay? So this is one example how a big company can work with a small company. I have 2 other cases, but because of time, I will skip the Philips case. You know the air fryer? Who knows the air fryer of Philips? Okay, only one person, so that's not good. But I will give you only the first example, the Isobionics and DSM. So here we have a startup commercializing the technology of a big company. The big company which is no longer interested in a technology it has been developing before, and a startup who is commercializing that technology. Okay. So what are we talking about? We are talking about Valencine. We are talking about Isobionics, that's a small company, a startup. And we are talking about Valencine. What is Valencine? You see the oranges there. Well, if you drink a Fanta, you think you drink an orange juice, but that's not the case. You drink something which is flavored by Valencine. And Valencine is a natural flavor that you get from an orange peel. Now what this company is doing is, it makes it 50% cheaper by using a biotech process, so it's a biotech process, right? Developed by DSM in the Netherlands, which is a big chemical company. Now, I will not explain too much about this technology. So it's a small company taking the technology of a big company, right? Now, what is the history? Twanne Janssen, the CEO of that small company, came from Philips. He was one of the CEOs there. Not the CEO, he was one of the managers there, right? And DSM developed the technology. It was no longer interested, so it was discarded. So it abandoned the technology, and it put it for sale. Twanne Janssen, he was interested. He set up Isobionics. He developed the Valencine as the first application of that microorganism. Isobionics has been very successful. It has a rapid growth. It has a duopoly position in the market. Major shake-up because it's 50% cheaper than natural Valencine, right? And it has been changing the flavor and fragrances industry. And what you see is that that small company worked together with the big company for a long time in the technology development. What you also see is that if you want to work together with a big company on the technology that it has released, that it has abandoned, you have to manage this relationship very well. So what helped here is that the manager was coming from a big company. And he understood how to find its way in the management of a big company. Because they understand each other, they estimate each other as equals. And so that's very important for credibility of the small firm and very important for the decision-making processes in large firms. So a small firm always has to do its homework before it starts the collaboration, right? Who is a trustworthy innovation partner? Here in this case, DSM was. But let's go to the IP. What is the problem if you work with a big company? Because this was not an easy game for the small company. The first thing you will see in a big company is what we called a not sold here syndrome. What does this mean? Well, a not invented here syndrome, you know. That means in big companies, they think they are smarter than anybody else. So these researchers will think that their invention is better than the invention of a small company elsewhere. But here it's about selling. That means that if DSM, if the big company does not know how to bring it to the market, does not know how to sell it on the market because they'd abandoned it, then why a small company could do that? So it's a kind of arrogance. So they don't believe the small company, even though they wanted to move on with this technology, they didn't believe the small company they could do it. They didn't get the licensing. Second thing is, there is no incentive in a large company to license this technology because it doesn't move the needle. Why would you do all these efforts? Why all this hassle to see it moving with a few €100,000, maybe €1 million? It's not worth the time for a big company. The startup also relies on the large company's technology, but that's then advantages for the small company. Why is this? Because you can use the reputation of the big company. If you say you work together with DSM, if you can say you work together with Samsung, that has a kind of halo effect, like we call it. It gives you credibility among the investors, among the banks, among the governments to get subsidies. So it's really nice once you're working with a big company. And entrepreneurship, well, it's also interesting that entrepreneurship and the speed of the startup, because the startup really generated revenues in 1 year time, opened the eyes of the scientists and technologists in the big companies. They were working for 5 years, nothing happened. Small company works 1 year and they get the results. And so if you want to instill entrepreneurship in a big company, let them work, let a big company work with small companies. So isobionics is a great case about light asset management too. Because what they do is basically they don't own the manufacturing, they don't own the R&D. Most of the R&D is done elsewhere with universities. You know what they do? Because this is a small company, so every euro is important. They don't do all the R&D. You know what they do? They have a platform, an R&D platform, and they invite universities, scientists at universities, to play with these organisms. And if they have results, then just inform the company what you have. And they can do whatever they want with these results, with the publications. Even when they want to have patents, they can do it, except when the company considers it as something very valuable for the company. Then they want to have the patent on their own. Right? So it's really, researchers are praying for this kind of things. They love to have this kind of experiments. They will do it for free. And you capture it. You capture the value whenever you see something interesting. Same happens for manufacturing things. There's a lot of bioreactors in Europe which are empty, which are not used for the moment. So he does not own any bioreactors. He just rents them. He goes for the very cheapest one. Right? So let me just move on. Philips, we don't see today. They didn't. Okay. Let me go to the last example. And this is an example not between large companies and small companies, but between small companies and other partners. So I forget about the big companies now. We just focus on a startup who wants to develop an idea and who needs other partners. And again, IP will play a very important role. Quilts of Denmark is, of course, a company in Denmark, a startup in Denmark, and it makes quilts. But there is something special. It makes functional quilts. Functional quilts really deliver a better sleep. So if you're not sleeping well tonight, you should have a look at Quilts of Denmark, right? And before I forget, I have other cases. All cases you can find on Harvard Business School cases. So they're all published. And if you're in an academic setting or in a kind of workshop setting, you can use them. There's a teaching note and everything, so you can use them. So who are the founders? This company is founded in 2000. Who are the founders? Two Danish people. This is Vandrup, this is in Denmark. And these people had a dream. These are two entrepreneurs and they had a dream. The dream was to come up with a better sleep. They were not talking about the quilt, right? They were talking about a better sleep. The result is this, Tempracom. This is a functional quilt. There is also a problem. Does it look different from your quilt at home? It looks exactly the same, right? Now, why would you pay 40% more for this one than the one you have at home, right? So it's not easy. Now, let's have a look. What is the problem? This is an industry, and I take it especially because most people talk about high-tech industries. This is low-tech. This is about quilts, made in China usually, right? So, very low-tech, no innovation. 50 years, no innovation at all. These people think not about a new quilt, they think about a better sleep. And why? Because they know from the literature that sleep is a huge problem. People sleep less. Youngsters don't sleep enough. Too many accidents. Probably here in Korea too, right? In Europe for sure. In the United States, you see all these things. So sleep is a problem. So, well, how do you want to improve sleep? Who knows something about sleep? Do you know? Do these two entrepreneurs know something about sleep? No. But who knows it? Sleep scientists. And that's what they did. So they went to sleep scientists and they went to physiotherapists, people that really understand sleep. And they brought them together a few times, right? They brought them together, offered them a lunch, and they were talking. And they realized that finally at the end, temperature variation under a quilt is one of the major determinants of a good sleep. Because it can be too hot, it can be too cold, and then you open it up, and then you close down, and that seems to cause a bad sleep. Not only that, but that's one of the reasons. So then we have, once this is a technology, so you got it from the doctors, right? You look for doctors, that's external, that's open innovation already. You get the answer, now you go for the technical solution. I will not go through all this. But finally, by accident, it's not a good case on that point, by accident, they found the technology in NASA. If you go for a walk on the moon, or you're in space, if the sun is shining on your chest, then it's very hot and it's very cold in the back. So how do you make sure that people survive? Well, you cannot do that just by isolation. So you need active materials, and one of these active materials is PCM. PCM helps you to it reduces the heat when it's hot, and it increases the heat, let's say, when it's cold. And NASA has been licensing this technology to Outlast. That's an American company who can use, let us say, or develop commercial, so civil applications, right, of this technology. So our company, Quilts of Denmark, went to Outlast and developed this technology. Oh, what happened? No, that's not good. Okay, something went wrong. I think the wrong slides were taken away. Never mind. Let me explain. What is the problem? You have the technology was developed by Outlast, right? And what Outlast has been doing is to make this kind of microcapsules here, where the PCM is involved. It was glued on the quilt, and it reduces, let us say, so when it's hot, it reduces, so it becomes colder, and when it's cold, it releases heat and it becomes warmer. So what you finally have is this kind of equal temperature under the quilt, right? So that's the technical part. But now let's think about IP. Who is the owner? Outlast is the owner. Who is the licensee? It's Quilts of Denmark. Now, they got a worldwide exclusive licensing agreement for the quilts and pillows. So you would say, bingo, that's exactly what I need. Exclusivity, worldwide, and I'm just working in pillows and quilts, so that's fine. But no, wait a minute. What will Outlast ask? Outlast wants a minimum amount of royalty income. And how big is your company? It's that big. You're very small, you're a startup company. You cannot deliver the royalty income that the licensor wants. So what is the licensor doing? It will force you to have sub-licensees. But sub-licensing in other countries means that somebody else has to market this very difficult product. And so it erodes the marketing, it erodes the image of that brand. And so it took them 7 years to come up with a next generation technology when the company was already bigger, to wipe out, let's say, the sub-licensees and to make it correct again. So you see, IP is very important, but making it correct, making it right is even more important. And so you see that this is not always working, right? So a small company has to be very careful in how to design these IP agreements with other companies or big companies or universities for another matter. I don't have more time. I have many more examples, but here I have to limit to 3 examples. We have some books. These are the 3 books of Henry Chesbrough. These are books for academics. The blue ones there on top, don't read them if you're a manager. But I have the Managing Open Innovation in SMEs, which is a book for which has all these examples. It has been translated in Chinese, and recently it has been Chinese and Korean, right? So if you want to read in Korean, you have it. This is an academic book on top there. Don't read that one. So if you want more information, please have a look at exnovate.org. We have PhD courses for academics the next year in Barcelona. We also have best practices to improve in open innovation in SMEs, so that's more a workshop that I organized 1 day or 2 days for SMEs, much more in depth than what I do right now. And there is 2 open innovation communities, one on Facebook, you can find them, Facebook and LinkedIn. What I'm doing now, for instance, is I move forward to innovation ecosystem. So not one-on-one relationships like I have been talking today, but very complex relationships like, for instance, health suites, right? Digital health suites, or for instance, digital agriculture, right? You can imagine that exists, precision agriculture, right? Or driverless trucks, this kind of stuff, digitalization of the energy sector and all these kind of things. So that was it. Thank you for your attention, and it's time for the third speaker.
네.